this. The rest of you, I want to encourage you to take notes, take note of what we talk about. And so hopefully this will help you with your video. With your post. First thing I want to say is this is a collection of Octavia Butler's short stories called Blood Child. I am extremely tempted to host an extra credit discussion on this story, Blood Child, because she talks about it so much in this interview. And I just, and the thing about it is, I made assumptions about the book. I just assumed it was about slavery. And she talks about how people always assume that just because she's Black, she's writing about slavery. But the story has nothing to do about slavery or race or what for that matter. But it's just a story. And so does everybody know who Octavia Butler is? I'm gonna give you some background. She is probably the most well-known, most successful Black female science fiction author in the world. She just passed away not too long ago, at about 70 from a sudden stroke. But and science fiction is typically dominated by white males. And she decided that she was going to break that trend. And she's probably one of the most popular science fiction authors. And so she's constantly pushing the boundaries, refusing to be boxed in. And this interview really reveals a couple of things. One of the things that has helped expand her imagination was reading everything. And she doesn't confine herself to only being proficient in one type of literature. And in her reading, she developed this style of writing. And she was very drawn to science fiction. Now, her science fiction is very unique because even in her writing of science fiction, she does not stick to any formulas, no societal formulas and no writing formulas. She is liberated in her writing. She writes whatever she wants. But what makes it science fiction is that there's a lot of otherworldly, magical, alienistic type things that happen in a lot of her stories. So with that being said, she says a couple of things that I just was cracking up at her. She says, so many critics have read this as a story about slavery, probably just because I'm Black. It's like she is purposely not trying to go there. And then the guy says, well, I was going to ask you later about the extent to which your work addresses slavery. And then she says, the only places I am writing about slavery is where I actually say so. So like, you can pick up her tone in this interview is very similar to the video you see. There are times when she can be very endearing, she's answering questions, but I always feel that if the question seems to box her in, she becomes extremely snippy, kind of short, very resistant to being boxed in. And she also had this desire to be free and liberated, to read whatever she wanted, to write whatever she wanted. And that transitioned into how she wrote, the story she wrote. Like she gave this example where she says the typical formula in a science fiction text is for the alien to take over the human world. But in this story, Blood Child, that's not what happened. It's another kind of story. So she's constantly, her science fiction is not always about humanity fighting against an alien to win. And she also does this thing where her antagonist, the bad guy of her stories, is not as bad as the typical bad guy. There's some qualities about them that you almost feel sorry for them. So if you've read Kindred, which is phenomenal, if you haven't, you got to read it. The bad guy, you do almost feel sorry for him. He's not. She and this one was about slavery. She does a good job of showing how this white man wrestles with treating Black people right and then living up to the way his family has always treated Black people. And I know me saying that, you're like, what? Like, but she does a good job of making you feel that inner struggle. So those are some things that, and I feel like she just really understands human beings. She understands the complexities of what it means to be a human, how conflicted some of our thoughts and emotions can be. And she does such an amazing job bringing that to the light. I almost would love to teach a whole class on Octavia Butler. All right, so all of that is my background on Octavia Butler. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on her? Nadelka.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I read Bloodchild last semester in one of my classes. And
Yes.
it's a very interesting science fiction. I don't think I've ever read any science fiction like that before.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you guys ever get the chance to read it, I think you should.
We need to do a discussion. Okay, see now we've got to do a discussion on it. Who would do it with me for extra credit? Anybody interested in some extra credit? Easy, it's easy extra credit. Okay, I think I'm gonna put this out. I'm gonna invite people to the bike. We're gonna do this. Would you like to do it in person? We get to see each other. Anybody want to do it in person? Okay. Let me think about that. And before the semester's over, I'm going to invite and we can discuss Bloodchild, okay? Maybe we'll make that the inaugural gathering of the new building in Old Town Alexandria. Stay tuned, Bloodchild, but I think I'm going to do that. Okay. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, questions? I feel so bad. Camille is having a hard time getting in here. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions on the reading on Octavia Butler? Comments, observations, reflections.
I read Parable of the Sower in AP Language Arts. I was in 11th grade. And
Okay.
It was really good.
Yeah. Do you see, I haven't read that one yet. I'm on a path of trying to really master everything she's ever written. I just find her amazing. Although I get scared really easy. So and Kindred about scared me half to death in some places. She's very descriptive in her writing, but I just find her stuff so good. I'm really puzzled by how this African-American woman got into this genre where her imagination is so expanded. Anybody else? Thoughts, comments, and questions on the interview with Octavia Butler?
I think finding out that, like, you know, she reads such a diverse amount of material and not just like, you know, a very focused you know, genre is something that kind of like made me realize, oh, maybe I should diversify what I read, because I do read a lot of, you know, nonfiction informational things about political theory and whatnot.
Yeah.
And maybe it just made me think, like, you know, somebody who's such a great writer as Octavia Butler is like, maybe I should expand my horizons. Maybe I will find something that will help me write better, or help me be able to describe certain things better and things like that.
Yes. You know, and that's what great. And you know what? You don't have to be inspired by Octavia just to be a writer. But I think everyone, no matter what career you're in, should want to expand their imagination. I don't know about you, but when I began, see, I'm coming late to this. You all are quite a bit younger than I am. I was in my 30s when I began to realize I should probably, I mean, my parents used to make me read a lot of stuff, and I had to read stuff for school, but that was because someone was making me do it. But me coming on my own to just enjoy literature outside of my cave, outside of my culturally relevant space, has done wonders for my imagination, my ability to just create, not even just literature, not just poetry or stories, but it just has expanded my mind to just understand people a lot more. Anyone else?
I found it interesting how she said she writes she likes writing because she can write herself in places where she necessarily wasn't, and I feel like that adds like a healing element to her like love of literature. So I feel like in a way, like I found it interesting. She kind of described it as kind of therapeutic.
Yes.
In a way, so like that was interesting to me.
Yes. Yeah. You feel that she really is exercising her freedom in her writing, because she doesn't. Also, you know how like Zora Neale Hurston, and this is not a critique on Zora because I love her too, but you know how most of Zora's writing just has to kind of do a Black life, and you can kind of get a sense of where she's going to go with her stories. Like literally, Octavia Butler, you never know where she's going with these stories. And it could be about anything. Like even with Kindred, I was so shocked when I saw that the man she was the main character, Dana, was married to a white man, and they fall in love, and they, and he's supporting her through this journey of being pulled back and forth into the past. That was so odd to have her on the one hand in love with a white man, and on the other fighting against racism with a white man. But that is so it was very difficult to make even Kindred about Blacks against whites. So she is just masterful of breaking out of the box. So I think we are inspired by her, not just from a literary point of view, but for just life, to step outside the box. Kiana?
I've read Amnesty by
Okay.
Octavia Butler. That's one of the pieces I read, and I'd say I have to agree because Amnesty, when I read it, it reminded me of one of Toni Morrison's piece where she doesn't specify which character is Black or white. It's up to the audience to decide.
Yes.
And that's how Octavia Butler writes to me. Like, they're about these certain issues and they're about Black life, but in a way where she's not necessarily pointing it out or making it obvious in a sense.
Yes. Yes.
Which genuinely takes an art to do, because most literature isn't really considered or even like looked at by a general audience if it's not like specifying which is which. So I think her not doing it opens it up to a larger and broader audience, because now white people are willing to read this, because it's not necessarily a book about white life or Black life in a sense, or Black and white or slavery and things in that sense. So they're willing to read it, and it's up to multiple interpretations. But I think when Black people read it, it's very similar to like the mermaid piece that we read, where like when we read it, we can get the meanings and the inspiration behind these pieces and how Octavia is interpreting these scenes and these characters in their situations.
Yes. And it seems like she really wants to bring people together around her writing, which is why she writes in a way where it's not us against them. It's like everyone's kind of, you almost lose sight of color. Has anybody else experienced that even though she might even be dealing with slavery or whatever, you almost don't feel a color line. Did anybody else feel that by anything that she's read?
I would say that because that's the same kind of feeling I got with Recitative, because I did that in my last English class. When I read that piece by Morrison, we had the whole debate on which character we thought was Black, which one we thought that was white, but there are no lines of colors. Like, they talk about race, but there are no lines that you can obviously tell, or ones that Morrison points out. And Octavia does the same thing in all of her pieces, because I read quite a few of them, but Amnesty is one of my favorite ones by her. Because I think the way that she does it, it's so subtle. It's such a subtle critique, and it's done artfully.
Like going back to Kindred again, the way she's dealing with slavery, but she really makes you feel sorry for the master and his family. I was so shocked even my own self. And she's not doing it through lies. She's not doing it by making them seem like they were nice masters, because they weren't. What she does is she unpacks how racism has destroyed the mentality of white people, and you see them as victims. It's really interesting how her view of the world. So I feel like her view of the world, and that's scary kind of. Her view of the world has to be that she has had to read all of human life in some way to become so empathetic to all people in her writing. Nadelka and then Joshua.
I think it's also more so like, because they don't explicitly say who's Black and who's white, you find yourself filling in the blanks yourself. And then when you go back and realize, oh, they never said who was which, you're like, wait, I'm doing the very thing that I spent my whole life like trying to avoid. And it's like, why you start to reflect and think about, oh, why did I attribute Blackness to this character and not this one? And it kind of makes you like critical of your own self.
Yes. Anybody else? Joshua.
So sort of relating to how Octavia Butler was able to make people relate to even the master.
Mhm.
One of the common themes of Parable of the Sower was empathy.
Mm.
So Lauren, the main character in the book, had this condition called hyper empathy. So she could feel how everyone else felt, like even pain inflicted on other people, she would automatically feel it. And like it was like really interesting to see how that played out in the book. Like there was even one time where she had to kill a dog. She said that she felt like she died, like watching a
Mm.
dog shot. So that just even goes to like that could even be related to how I guess Octavia Butler feels about her life,
Yes.
just the way that she's empathetic and how her empathy can sometimes hurt her more than help.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
common themes like that, I guess she kind of puts it into her life through her characters.
Yes. Yes, because until she does that in Kindred, because in Kindred, the Black girl ends up trying to save or help the white family in some ways. Very
Yeah,
empathetic.
for sure. Like
And I
that,
think, go ahead.
yeah, I think that's like because that's like a common theme in not only that book but now this one. So it's like you see a lot of herself and a lot of her own writing.
Yeah. And she shows, and so I have to read that one then, because that same vibe is what's in Kindred, this interconnectedness, right? Her writing, because that comes out in Bloodchild, how we need each other, whether you're the victim or the villain, the monster or the human, the Black person or the white person. There are these moments in these stories where they become dependent upon one another for survival. What is that all about? You know, we're in such a divided place right now. Republican, Democrat, Black, white, left, right, liberal, conservative, progressive, and I don't know what the other one is. Progressive and what is that? Conservative too? Like everything is this or that. But when you enter into the world, it seems, of Octavia Butler, she seems to want to remove those dividing lines, and we're just all interconnected, fighting to survive in this planet, in this universe, sometimes hurting each other and sometimes helping each other. Is that the story of humanity, would you say?
Yeah, I would definitely agree
Mhm.
for sure. Like I think the reason why we are so obsessed with division and finding other like ways to disagree is just because we want to find such a sense of belonging.
Mhm.
But like instead of it being like, oh, the Black race or the white race, we gotta like remember. I know this is corny, but remember we're a human race.
Yes.
But I guess it all just goes back to people like desirable of identity, and
Yes.
people just want to have somewhere to belong. Like
Yep.
I know in psychology they study it, how people like group think and how they
Yes.
just want to be along somewhere. And yeah, with Octavia Butler, you could definitely see that even though like in Parable of the Sower, there was like division, even like she still had love for her enemy and she still
Yeah.
had uh, hyper empathy where she felt things and related to everyone despite no matter their intentions.
Yes.
That does go along with just how we should be more as people rather than being so focused on division.
Ooh. And that's hard, right? I mean, I feel like, I think, because she mentioned some things. Just love her. She mentions she has distanced herself with some of the commentary in society to protect the way she's thinking. This is when she's talking about criticism. I avoid, okay, he asks her, I was wondering if you were at all familiar with cultural theory. She says, no. I avoid all critical theory because I worry about it feeding into my work. I mean, I don't worry about nonfiction in general feeding in. In fact, I hope it will, but I worry about criticism influencing me because it can circle, or something worse. It's just an impression of mine, but in some cases, critics and authors seem to be massaging each other. It's not very good for storytelling. So she protected her space of freedom by not feeding into the opinions of society, the culture, and she's just in Octavia's world. But this is the thing. You don't get the sense that she's an Uncle Tom or a Candace Owens or a person who just kind of wants to forget the past. She's not that either. But I think what she's saying, and she doesn't want it to influence her or to trap her or to burden her so that she cannot fly free in her imagination, because it can do that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, if I believe if like if she were to look at more negative and like feedback on a lot of her books, that would change the way that she would write. She'll like as she was writing, she would think, oh, this critic would probably say something about this, so let me not exactly say it this way, or let me say it this way.
Yes.
So, I mean, you can kind of see that with like a lot of the influencers, I guess, like through YouTube. Like I kind of like watching YouTube and stuff, but you could just see how much of a mental toll that the negative comments are on like content, and the dislike to like ratio. And even with actors choose not to choose different roles because they're scared of how, things like that, and how their pockets would be affected. But that even shows just how genuine Octavia Butler is, because she's like, whether the money's affected or it's not, I'm still going to write how I want to write.
Yeah. She was truly a free person. Nadelka.
What you just said about how she doesn't let things keep her from flying and like her potential, it just reminded me of Zora Neale Hurston and one of her autobiographical things. I think it's called How It Feels to Be Colored Like Me.
Yes, I love that.
She makes this metaphor about like she's not a sorrowful African American, and she's just busy like sharpening her oyster knife.
Yes.
That just reminded me of that.
Yes. Hold on one second. I had an emergency. Hold on. Okay. Yes, absolutely. She really is a modern version of Zora Neale Hurston. Because Zora Neale, like if you read, let's say, for example, that story, Nadelka, and Their Eyes Were Watching God, you do get a sense of a joy. She's talking about Black life, but not in the context of racism necessarily. They're just, or when she talks about Eatonville, and just, she makes the life of Black people very beautiful, very artistic, joyful. It's not a lot in the stories I've read so far with Zora Neale Hurston, especially those ones that you've mentioned. She seeks to find a joy in just being who she is in her own skin. And so you see that Octavia Butler is doing something similar, but through the art of science fiction. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just any more thoughts, comments, or questions, reflections, observations?
I love her genuineness.
Yeah, I do too. Very inspiring. I mean, yeah. Anything else? You all were a much better class than all my other classes today, by the way. Even though you all are quiet, you're not as quiet. And I could enjoy talking about this woman with a few of you. Anyone else? I don't know if it'll transfer outside of that world, Kanadu. Like in the book, she does a good job of helping you feel some type of empathy to white people. But I will say this, the way she writes about them, she doesn't just dismiss them as evil or bad or the bad guy. She humanizes them. But isn't that the important thing? Just like we have felt white people have dehumanized us, because they do, and the media does. and see us as inferior. In our pain, and I'm not criticizing us for feeling this way, but in our pain and dealing with racism, we have also dehumanized white people. Tell me if I'm wrong. Tell me. I feel like Octavia Butler, though, challenges all of us to stop dehumanizing everyone, and that human beings are too complex to put in such boxes. That every person has a heart, every person has a soul, and every person has a life experience that has made them who they are. And what I see in her writing, and you hear it in this interview that we read, that she is using her writing and her expansive imagination to explore the complexities of humanity. But I do not think, as Blake, I said earlier, I do not think she would be that creative, that imaginative, without reading outside of her cave. And I'm so glad that some of you all picked that up in the interview, and that started when she was young, just her love for the library and just reading everything. You know, she's growing up in the 50s, 60s, and reading books that mainly white children read in California or whatever. But she didn't care. She was not stuck in her cave. And as a result, she had a much deeper understanding of human beings than most of us do. Any other thoughts, comments, or questions? Well, we will stop here for today. I hope you enjoy the interview if you haven't watched of Octavia Butler, and I look forward to seeing what you post in your discussion post. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.